There exists a fascinating paradox at the heart of contemporary existence. Never before have individuals had such a multitude of opportunities to publicly express themselves. We can disseminate our thoughts in an instant. We can convey our preferences, opinions, identities, aspirations, and experiences to audiences of varying sizes. The discourse of individuality envelops us. We are urged to be unique, visible, and distinctive. Yet, many individuals quietly experience an increasing disconnection from their true selves. Not due to a lack of freedom, but rather because they exist in an environment inundated with influence. A setting where algorithms dictate attention, where trends dictate desire, where social validation dictates expression, and where comparison often operates without conscious awareness. The pressure is seldom overt. No one stands beside us directing who we should become. Instead, influence manifests subtly. Through repetition, through societal expectations, through the quiet yearning to belong, through the anxiety of exclusion, through the allure of recognition. Over time, an individual may begin to modify themselves in ways that are challenging to detect, not in a dramatic fashion, just sufficiently to conform, just sufficiently to be comprehended, just sufficiently to receive affirmation. The difficulty lies in the fact that when adaptation becomes a continuous process, something significant may become obscured. An individual may achieve high visibility while feeling internally invisible. They may excel at presenting themselves while becoming increasingly unfamiliar with their own identity. This is why authenticity remains such an intriguing concept. Not because it is trendy, but because it addresses a profound human inquiry. What does it mean to truly inhabit your own life, rather than merely perform a version of it? And perhaps even more crucially, what type of freedom is accessible when an individual's choices, voice, values, and expression start to arise from true alignment instead of ongoing external influence? Today, we are examining authenticity not in the context of self-promotion, self-revelation, or extreme individualism. We are considering it as an inner luxury, a type of psychological freedom that may be becoming increasingly scarce in a world where attention, identity, and influence are in constant flux. And perhaps, within that scarcity, there exists a form of modern wealth that cannot be bought, amassed, or borrowed. It can only be experienced. When individuals encounter the expression "be yourself," it frequently appears straightforward, nearly self-evident. However, upon closer examination, the situation reveals itself to be significantly more intricate. Most individuals are continuously molded by their families, workplaces, communities, institutions, media landscapes, and digital platforms. We internalize societal expectations long before we become aware of them. We take in notions regarding success, attractiveness, intelligence, achievement, and belonging. Furthermore, due to the largely unseen nature of this influence, it can be challenging to differentiate between what truly resonates with our identity and what has merely become familiar through repeated exposure. In a society where influence is pervasive and often subtle, what do you believe makes authentic self-expression such a challenging endeavor for numerous individuals to attain?
One reason for this phenomenon is that authenticity is frequently perceived as a pre-existing entity, fully formed and residing within us, merely awaiting discovery. However, lived experiences tend to be far more intricate than this notion suggests. Individuals typically invest years in shaping themselves in relation to the expectations imposed by their surroundings. This process is an inherent aspect of the human experience. We acquire knowledge through imitation, participation, belonging, and adaptation. None of these mechanisms are intrinsically detrimental. The challenge arises when adaptation becomes so pervasive that it eliminates the opportunity for reflection. A person may excel at fulfilling expectations yet become increasingly disconnected from their own internal reactions. They are aware of what garners rewards. They understand what is deemed acceptable. They recognize what is esteemed. Yet, they might lose touch with what truly resonates within them. I believe that the current age of influence exacerbates this issue, as influence is no longer sporadic but rather incessant. Individuals are exposed to countless examples daily of how life should be lived, how success ought to manifest, how opinions should be articulated, and how identities should be expressed. Ultimately, it becomes challenging to discern the quieter signals emanating from within. These quieter signals often harbor the essence of authenticity, not in certainty, not in confidence, but in the subtle sensations of alignment and misalignment. Many individuals do not face difficulties due to a deliberate intent to be dishonest. They struggle because the overwhelming presence of external influence renders internal listening progressively more challenging. Thus, authenticity shifts from being primarily about self-expression to being more about self-recognition. It involves the ability to perceive what remains true beneath the layers of approval, comparison, expectation, and performance.
It appears that contemporary influence typically operates through aspiration instead of coercion. Individuals seldom feel compelled to conform. Rather, they are drawn towards ideals that seem appealing, successful, esteemed, or sought after. Furthermore, since these influences frequently come from individuals we hold in high regard, it may become challenging to discern when admiration gradually transforms into imitation. What are your thoughts on how individuals may unconsciously stray from their true selves while perceiving that they are progressing towards an improved version of themselves?
I believe this occurs because aspiration can serve as both a source of inspiration and a means of distortion. There is nothing inherently wrong with learning from others. In fact, a significant portion of human development relies on it. However, there exists a nuanced point at which inspiration may transform into mere substitution. An individual ceases to inquire, what resonates as true for me, and instead starts to ask, often without awareness, what would render me more acceptable, more admired, more recognized. The transition is subtle, yet, over time, it builds up. Decisions begin to mirror external expectations rather than internal beliefs. The individual may still perceive themselves as successful. They might even gain validation. Nevertheless, something increasingly feels strained as their life becomes structured around borrowed definitions. I often contemplate how authenticity gradually diminishes, not through a dramatic betrayal of the self, but through numerous small instances of adjustment, modifying language, modifying preferences, modifying ambitions, modifying emotional expression. Each modification appears innocuous in isolation. However, ultimately, a person may realize that much of their life has been tailored for external approval rather than genuine resonance. The ensuing exhaustion is not always apparent. It may manifest as restlessness, dissatisfaction, or a vague feeling that something significant is absent despite outward success. The individual is not necessarily devoid of achievement. They are devoid of connection with their own experiences.
In your observations, what typically shifts internally when an individual starts to reconnect with their true self? This does not have to involve a dramatic transformation, but rather a gradual journey towards greater honesty regarding their values, beliefs, desires, and aspects of their life that no longer resonate with their authentic identity.
One of the initial transformations frequently involves a decrease in internal negotiation. Numerous individuals expend significant energy managing the gap between their true selves and the personas they feel compelled to adopt. As this gap begins to close, life tends to become less psychologically intricate, not necessarily simpler, but more coherent. Decisions become more subdued. Relationships become more transparent. Self-expression becomes less about performance. Additionally, there is an increasing sense of relief. This relief does not stem from the complete absence of uncertainty, but rather from the individual no longer feeling the burden of sustaining multiple conflicting identities. They become more unified. I believe authenticity is often misinterpreted as self-assurance. However, what I more commonly observe is self-consistency. This is the experience of no longer needing to constantly modify oneself for various audiences. Such consistency fosters stability, and stability engenders tranquility. Individuals frequently report feeling more grounded, more present, and more emotionally accessible. This is not due to having achieved perfection, but because they have ceased to engage in perpetual negotiation with themselves.
What are your thoughts on the most common misconceptions people have regarding authenticity in contemporary society? It is frequently portrayed as a type of unrestrained self-expression. However, true authenticity appears to be more subdued and potentially more challenging than this.
One common misconception is that authenticity equates to revealing everything. However, authenticity does not imply a lack of discernment. It represents alignment. A person may be very expressive yet remain profoundly disconnected from their true self. Conversely, an individual can be private, reserved, and remarkably authentic. Authenticity is not gauged by how visible one is. It is assessed by congruence. Another misconception is that authenticity should be a comfortable experience. In truth, authenticity often entails discomfort as it necessitates letting go of certain forms of approval. When a person starts to act from a place of deeper conviction, they naturally become less suited for universal acceptance. This shift can evoke feelings of vulnerability. People frequently envision freedom as acquiring something new. Yet, living authentically often requires the relinquishment of certain elements, such as specific expectations, certain performances, certain identities that no longer resonate. This journey can feel uncertain. Nevertheless, it fosters a deep sense of integrity, and integrity is frequently much more stabilizing than mere approval.
The subject of our discussion pertains to authenticity as a representation of opulence or luxury. This terminology may appear peculiar at first glance, as authenticity is not a tangible asset. It cannot be acquired or exhibited through traditional means. What are your thoughts on why true self-expression is perceived as more luxurious in a society influenced by visibility, comparison, and external pressures?
Authenticity fosters a type of freedom that is increasingly uncommon. Numerous modern systems vie for attention, behavior, and identity. They shape what individuals purchase, pursue, admire, and even envision. In such circumstances, staying attuned to one's inner orientation becomes remarkably valuable, not because it renders one entirely independent of influence. That is unattainable, but because it enables influence to be processed through awareness rather than functioning automatically. There is a certain luxury in not being swayed by every trend, a luxury in not requiring constant validation, a luxury in feeling free to embrace your own pace, values, and preferences. These experiences may seem commonplace, yet psychologically, they are exceptional, particularly in settings where comparison is incessant. I believe authenticity also alleviates a specific type of fatigue, the fatigue of sustaining a self that primarily exists for observation. When expression arises from alignment instead of performance, energy is preserved. Life appears lighter, more straightforward, more livable. This is why authenticity can feel opulent, not because it enhances status, but because it diminishes internal confinement.
As an individual progressively becomes less swayed by external validation and more grounded in their personal sense of alignment, what aspects of their life become less burdensome? What weights start to diminish?
I believe that one burden that lightens is the pressure to perpetually monitor oneself. Numerous individuals engage in a subtle practice of self-surveillance. They are in a constant state of assessing their appearance, their comparisons, and how they are perceived. This monitoring demands significant attention. As authenticity deepens, some of this monitoring diminishes. Attention shifts back to the experience itself. Comparison tends to become less burdensome as well, not because comparison vanishes completely, but because it loses some of its power. The lives of others transform into information rather than directives. Another burden that begins to dissipate is the pursuit of perfection. Authenticity embraces humanity. It allows for contradiction. It fosters growth. It accommodates uncertainty. An individual no longer feels obligated to uphold an idealized image at all times. Perhaps most significantly, there is a reduction in fear, a decrease in the fear of disagreement, a decrease in the fear of misunderstanding, a decrease in the fear of not meeting every expectation. Not because courage becomes a constant state, but because alignment is valued more than approval. When this transformation takes place, life often feels more expansive. The self is no longer burdened by as much performance.
If an individual were to take a tranquil evening to contemplate their life, not inquiring about their success, productivity, admiration, or recognition, but merely pondering where they feel most authentic inside, do you believe this question could uncover?
I believe it may uncover moments instead of accomplishments, specific discussions, specific connections, specific types of work, specific settings. Instances where effort dissipates and presence becomes attainable. Instances where the individual is not controlling perception but fully experiencing. It may also highlight areas where adaptation has become overly pronounced. Areas where energy is expended on preserving an identity rather than truly living. I do not think such awareness necessarily comes in a dramatic fashion. Frequently, it emerges quietly, as an emotion, a delicate sense of expansion when everything is in harmony, or a gentle contraction when it is not. Perhaps authenticity originates from this point, not from certainty, not from proclamation, but from mindfulness. The readiness to observe where life feels authentically lived and where it seems merely acted out. And perhaps that observation itself is a kind of liberation.
One of the most understated luxuries that a person can possess is the ability to truly belong to themselves. This does not imply isolation from others, but rather an honest connection with their own experiences. In a society saturated with influence, comparison, visibility, and expectations, authenticity may extend beyond mere self-expression. It could also serve as a means of self-preservation, a method of safeguarding the inner voice from being entirely drowned out by external distractions. Ultimately, the truest form of freedom may not lie in the capacity to become anyone. It may instead reside in the readiness to stay connected to one's true self. This could explain why authenticity is perceived as so precious in contemporary times, not because it is uncommon in theory, but because it is infrequently practiced, a subtle form of wealth that cannot be amassed, but rather experienced.